All right, welcome everyone to our June Grand Rounds. This is the June session of our Ability Grand Rounds series, and that's for 2024-25 academic year. We are into our fourth, maybe fifth year of this, and we absolutely love it. It has gone national and even international, as you can see with our presenter today. This gives us a chance to meet our peers, hear about their work, and make our world a little bit smaller in terms of all that we do with a focus on disabilities. So I want to remind everyone that we do have closed captioning, and that's available at the bottom of the screen. If you have any issues, let me know, and I would be happy to point you in the right direction. I also would like to ask you to mute your line. We do really appreciate active discussion, either through the chat or raising your hand, but in between, the noise in the background can get a little distracted. So just make sure that you monitor that every now and then. As it seems, if you touch a keyboard, it takes the mute off. So just watch that if you don't mind. And as part of collaboration, if you don't mind to put your name and affiliation, tell us a little bit about yourself in the chat. That gives us an idea of who's here today. And then if you're comfortable, turn on your camera. It's good to see face, but we understand if you're not. Totally fine. And then lastly, raise your hand, or again, use the chat for any other question. And there will be times to ask questions either at the end of every slide if you would like, or definitely at the end of the presentation. Feel free to do that. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Paula Hamilton is a senior lecturer of the School of Education. She's the program leader for the Masters of Education in Society and Globalization. And she's from University of Chester in the United Kingdom. So very excited to have her speak to us today. You can see the title of our talk, and I'm very excited about the topic. Particularly, we're going to be talking about children's early understandings of disability, and then particular strategies or approaches that we could use in those early years as professionals to engage children. So I know, seeing some of the names, that this is very pertinent to what you do on a daily basis, and I'm excited to turn it over to Dr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for inviting me to deliver this seminar today. Welcome, everybody. I think it feels like many months ago now, it was many months ago, that Leslie reached out shortly after my paper, Out of the Mouths of Babes, was published, and invited me to come along today. So I'm really happy to be able to share some of the findings from this paper with you. So the main aim is, to really understand at what point do children start to notice differences about the human body, particularly with regards to disability, and what can we do as practitioners, whether that be teachers, early years workers, or even parents, to aid some of the children's understanding, so children are getting more positive understandings about disability. Before we start, I'll just give a little bit about background about myself, and also Millie, who was the student field worker who unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon. It's evening here, it's 7 o'clock just gone in the UK. I have been a teacher all my life. I have worked in primary schools and secondary schools. I entered higher education working as a senior lecturer on childhood and education programs in 2007. And I've worked in 2 different universities, one in Wrexham. I don't know, Ryan Reynolds has bought Wrexham Football Stadium, so he's a regular visitor here. And just literally about 20 minutes, half an hour's drive is Chester, which is currently where I work. So I work in the School of Education, but most of my specialism is inclusion, diversity, equality, social justice, but mainly in relation to children's early understandings. So for me as well, I enjoy listening to children's voices from using creative methods. So that might be through toys, through play, through artwork. So that's the other part of my interest is teaching research methods to students. And Millie was a student of mine a couple of years ago now, and she did her BA in childhood studies with applied psychology. And Millie became really interested in disability for various reasons. She had, I think it was either her brother or her younger cousin had Down syndrome, and she'd had a lot of experience, obviously, with Down syndrome inside the family. And it was in her second year when we started to think, what might she do for her dissertation, her final big piece of research when she got into the third year of her degree. And she said, Paula, I'd really like to find out about when does young children start to notice about disability. And this is how it started. So now Millie completed her teaching, and she's a primary school teacher, and her view is what she'd like to do is to become a special educational needs coordinator. So to give a little context on this, in the UK, in all of our primary and our secondary schools, schools have to have at least one special educational needs and disability coordinator looking after the children that are diagnosed with having a special educational need or disability. And that is usually you have to do straight mainstream teaching first, and then you have to, after a couple of years, you can do almost a master's programme in what we call CED, Special Educational Needs and Disability. So that is where Millie is aiming to go. And I'm now going to start sharing. I think it was important for me to give you that sort of background to myself and Millie. So really happy and excited to share some of the findings of the research with you today. Before I get into the actual findings of the paper, I think it's important to give a global picture. I know if you do have, I should say, if you do have any questions, perhaps at the end of the slide, or as I'm talking to you about each slide, please do write into the chat, and Leslie's, before I go on to the next slide, Leslie's going to let me know if anybody's asking any questions. And then at the end of the presentation, hopefully there'll be ample time for you to ask into any questions that you might want to know and to engage with me. So globally, 32% of children with disabilities have been bullied at some point. 1 in 3 children with disabilities experience emotional and physical violence. 1 in 5 some form of neglect, and 1 in 10 sexual violence. So that makes it pertinent that we are mindful and we are aware of what's actually happening in schools, particularly with children who have special educational needs and disabilities. And this quote, and it's inside the paper, Out of the Mouths of Babes, is essentially what we try to do, something small, okay? We invite all educators to engage critically with disability in the curriculum, to read more about disability studies, literature, to understand the theory, and to start small by integrating one counter-narrative into a lesson or school-wide initiative. And essentially that is what Millie did through the use of diversity dolls, or sometimes they're known as persona dolls. And yeah, I'll go into that more as we continue. So to give some statistics then, in the UK, 2024, sorry, 11% of all children in the UK were identified as having some form of disability. In the same year, 18% of all our children, pupils in school, have been identified with a special educational need. In 2020, the latest figures are confined. Less than 10% of pupils with a special educational need or a disability attended a special school. That means most of our children, 90% of the children in the UK who've got a special educational need or disability are inside our mainstream schools. I think that's really important. And how do we define disability in the UK? And our government defines it by a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment, this is word for word, that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on their ability to do normal daily activities. So how do they define a special educational need? We have a code of practice. This is now for school teachers. They have to follow this policy. This is the most up-to-date one. And it outlines the legal requirements, the statutory duties that educational settings and local authorities must follow to support children and young people aged 0 to 25 who have we call it CED, special educational needs and a disability. So that's sort of the definitions, those are the statistics. So most of our children with special educational needs are inside mainstream. So any questions before I continue?
No questions in the chat.
I should add, you know, particularly in the early years, it does take, they don't just jump onto diagnosing children. It's a monitored approach. So, you know, that figure could be a little higher. Those are children who've been identified inside our schools. And I've just done some recent work on girls with autism. And again, in the UK, girls with autism are being diagnosed much later into their secondary school and, you know, and beyond, as perhaps many of you realise. So the number is what we've got, but we think it could be higher than 18% of our pupils identified. Okay. So a little bit of a history, because we are going to look at out of the mouths of babes. Some of the children had quite prejudiced views, unfortunately, about disability. So we're just going to have a brief overview of the history. So it's not so long ago, particularly in the UK, that we had policies, you know, and some of the wording, it's changed now, but we had now we regard some of these words as, you know, quite backward, if you like, quite offensive to people with disabilities. The use of spastic, retard, that is a no-no inside any of our, you know, schools now. And those children in our legislation and our policy were not seen as children that they could be educated, so they were almost rounded up and sent to special schools. And then we had an educational policymaker, Mary Warnock, and you know, she actually was at the forefront at the time, saying some of these children should be inside mainstream. Parents should support the children, and teachers should support some of the children if they so wish to get back into mainstream. So then we started quite a lot of work inside our mainstream schools to support children. I would say the children, the 10% that are in special needs schools, are often children with very complex disabilities, often medical, often complex cognitive needs, and their group sizes are much smaller. There's the specialist resources, therapy, like pools, there's a lot of really resourced good centres for children with the most complex needs. Other children often are, I think, more placed inside the mainstream. Obviously, there's been, the involuntary sterilisation of people with disabilities worldwide, the UK included. And then in the 21st century, literally we've got the genetic research and parents being asked, are you sure you want to have this baby? It's looking like this child is impaired. So we've got those sort of the screening and who is to make the choice of what is a quality life, We've also got then digital culture, and I've included a picture of a lady that was inside our news, fearful to take her child out into public, into social spaces such as the park and to preschool, because of the stigma of her child with a disability. Scared to put photographs onto the social media platforms such as Instagram because of her child not looking the norm. So the digital culture has a lot, perfect bodies, perfect faces. The quest for that has not really helped with people who don't quite fit, those norms that I think digital culture aspires to. So also our disability hate crimes is quite high in comparison to race and LGBT. It's much lower, but, and there is a big but, we think in the UK that the statistics are much higher. The people with disabilities who face hate crime, or abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, could be much higher, because often it's coming from perhaps friends, family, and carers too, and it's often not reported by people with disabilities. So quite a bit of work in the UK around that at the moment. Any questions? Okay. So turning now to primary schools, because that's really where I sit. Primary schools. A number of studies are suggesting that our children with special educational needs, disabilities, are twice as likely to suffer bullying and exclusion from their classmates, to have fewer friends, and to be unhappy in school. And there's a big report in 2016, but also our Anti-Bullying Alliance in just a year ago echoed those findings. So, things are not improving much. There is a reason, I believe, why, which I'm going to go into to share with you shortly. Interestingly, children with physical difficulties are often viewed more favourably. And I think the study that was conducted between Millie and myself, I think we found that as well. Children with physical difficulties are often can make friends and do have friends, in comparison to the children who have learning differences, who are particularly at risk by their classmates. And as we know, stigma can have long-lasting impact into adulthood on psychological, social, educational development. So it's important that our early years workers and our teachers are supporting and educating others in a positive way about disability. So emerging concepts, developmental theories state from about 4 years old, children begin to recognise, I'd argue it was a little bit earlier than that, visual disabilities. Children see at age 2, 3, 4, they're starting to recognise that some people look different, and start to make assumptions regarding what people can do and what they can't do, with more abstract concepts emerging from about the age of 7. Ableist norms are often put across unintentionally inside earlier settings, in homes, by parents, through cultural products, from the books that we give children, the nursery rhymes that we might be singing to children, through the TV programs that the children are watching. Children are getting bombarded with these messages about what looks normal and perhaps abnormal. And often children are developing perceptions that impairment or disability should perhaps be pitied, feared, cured, or we've got to accommodate. Okay. So children are starting to recognise that some bodies and ways of being are viewed as non-normative and more undesirable than others, leading to often exclusion and othering inside primary and earlier settings, which is what Out of the Mouths of Babes continued to suggest. Promoting disability awareness. Now, earlier I said that a lot of attention is given to, in our schools in the UK, a significant amount of attention is given to the 90% of children that have a SEND, special educational needs disability, that come into our mainstream schools, because we have a specialist teacher. At least one. All teachers have lots of training as well, all our mainstream teachers. So the teachers are well equipped. However, what we are finding is inside our curriculum, what we talk to children about inside the UK, we do a lot of EDI, we do a lot on race and ethnicity, and we do a lot on gender. In fact, one of my other areas is gender, and I've just spent a lot of time looking at how children start to get gendered messages through play, etc. But what we often have done, even though there's a lot of support for the children with the disabilities, we are not teaching other children about disability in the same way that we have been doing about race, ethnicity and gender inequalities inside our primary schools, secondary schools and obviously our nurseries. So these silences, we're not mentioning it to children, they are just making those perceptions that perhaps are not correct, that are perhaps more negative, which risk continuing into adulthood. I'm not showing it in this slide, but I do another session with my undergraduate students and my master's students, looking at perhaps people who have people with disabilities who have been physically injured or killed. There's not many that have hit the papers in the UK, but unfortunately, I can think now of about at least 7 young people to young adults that have lost their lives because of others, because of their disability. And to me, that shouldn't be happening. You know, one life lost is too many, just because of somebody's disability. So again, this to me is why I'm passionate about trying to promote understanding inside as early as we can with children. So if we try to work with children to understand what their early belief structures are, and they may be negative at the beginning, we can start to shape materials and safe spaces in which we can counteract some of those early perceptions and often misunderstandings. And it should be, I advise to take a disabilities studies approach with children. And that obviously the theory behind that can be quite complex, but towards the end, after I share my findings of the paper that conducted with Millie, I've broken down some advice on what practitioners can do in a simple way, following the disability studies framework. So I'm going to share the paper now. Out of the Mouths of Babes was published last year. It was a result of, it's a blend really. Millie collected the field work, and I have worked probably for about 18 months, merging her findings with a lot of my work that I do on how children learn early social biases. Millie worked in a school, a primary school, as a teaching assistant, and while she was on the undergrad programme, and actually worked with 20, well, she worked in a class of 30 children, but 20 children's parents gave their permission to be involved in the study. So there was about, I think there was about 9 that didn't send the consent forms back, okay? So what Millie did, and we obviously, I was her supervisor, Millie asked children about some very basic questions about 6 diversity dolls. And I'll show you a picture of the dolls in a minute, but the dolls actually had a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, mobility impairment, a cleft palate and Down syndrome. And the 6th doll had no obvious disability. The children, so we checked with them, Millie did work, as I say, as a teaching assistant, but she checked with the class teacher, they'd not had any information inside the school on disability. They had, because in our earlier settings, in our primary school settings, they had sort of personal and social education, which is being nice and kind to others, but they hadn't had any formal teaching on disability. So what you're seeing now, and what I'm going to share, is the children's raw views. We don't know, some of the children did have some, I think there was a young boy with a hearing aid, so hearing impaired. A couple of the children had glasses, and I think there were a couple of children that may have had ADHD, but it wasn't a concrete classification. They were going through the process. They were still quite young. Okay, so but we don't know, you know, what experience did those children have outside of school of disability, perhaps in the family. We're not sure. So that is perhaps a gap within this literature. Nevertheless, we know that they haven't had any formal teaching inside school on disability. So those are the dolls that were shared with the children. The dolls, except for the one at the back on with Down syndrome, had actually come from an educational resource that the schools use. And the other dolls, it was quite expensive, that doll, to buy. So Millie was funding this herself. When she realised the dolls were about £60 UK money, she thought, okay, I can't quite afford that. So her mum, who is a design and technology teacher inside secondary school, designed and made some of the, you know, the assistive devices that you can see, and the child, the baby with the cleft palate, etc. So what we know is the children, talked very much about the causes of disability. They were using and drawing upon the medical model of disability. There was definitely these binary views: what was normal, what was abnormal, and the social consequences, the negative consequences of having a disability. And Millie didn't enter into any discussion. She just asked very simple questions like, who is likely to be best at football? Who is best to be best perhaps at dance? Who's going to have more friends? Who would you like to be friends with? So just really simple questions that the children could understand. Who does best at school with their classes, and so forth. The key themes that came out of the discussions with the children: friendships, that was a key question that Millie had asked anyway, but abilities, behaviour, and facial features. This is something we weren't really, this was very much evolved from the children's free play, when the children were just allowed to play with the dolls. So before I go in and look at each of those themes, Leslie, any questions at all?
Not yet.
Okay, I don't know whether that's good or bad, but we will see at the end. Okay. So, friendships. The doll in the wheelchair, remember these are 6 and 7 year olds, but the doll in the wheelchair was significantly more popular. 26 children wanted to play with them or thought they would have more friends. And it was because the wheelchair was seen as cool. I'm using the children's words here now, and the cool was used quite a lot of times. Fun to push. And unfortunately, the doll was unable to do very much, so would need our help and our care and protection. And there was a lot of children saying, I want to look after him or her, I want to help them, I can help them do things in school, they may not have many friends, so I want to look after them and help be their friend. So there was, which you could say, is a medical model again of looking at disability. I think what was interesting as well from these young children, they kept thinking that the child in the wheelchair one day would get out of the wheelchair and would be able to do everything that they could do. So, it was temporary in the wheelchair. So it looks like these has also been found by other researchers. It's the devices, like the wheelchair, the hearing aid, that may result in children with disabilities being pitied, viewed as incapable, dependent on others. But it also makes, or can make, young children a little bit nervous of how to interact. They're going to be new pieces of equipment. So again, in early years settings, in parents, etc., we can, just the use of books, social, emotional literacy books. There's some fantastic now diversity books where we can start to introduce characters that have some of these assistive devices, and also persona dolls. We can buy them, as I say, there's a lot of great places that you can actually buy the persona diversity dolls, and so we can introduce those into the classroom. And also, just really on posters, children need to be seeing images on even jigsaws, on the toy packaging of different children with disabilities, on rather than just always looking at sort of able-bodied, normal-bodied, quotation mark there, children. So they need to see diverse bodies through pictorially. So let's continue then. I'm losing my cursor. Friendships, again, the second doll that they thought, it's going to have more friends, was the doll with no apparent disability. And the children said, well, it's got nothing weird about them. There's nothing wrong about them, so I want them to be my friend. However, equally, there was concern, particularly during free play, that the doll that had no apparent disability could bully each other, and the children were acting out scenes of when they were left to play, just picking up the dolls and of children, the dolls bullying each other. And two dolls were often the bullies, and that was the doll with the Down syndrome and the child that had got no apparent disability. We're not quite sure. She didn't dig deep enough for that, but I think that's another piece of research at some point. But again, this does confirm that children with SEND are twice as likely to suffer from bullying and exclusion. Looking at what children can and can't do, so abilities, you can see clever children, the best at dancing, football, etc. Those are some of the questions she asked. The doll in the wheelchair was seen as that doll is going to do better than anybody at school because they can sit nicely. They're not going to be naughty, they're going to sit nicely. And the doll with visual impairment because people who wear glasses are very clever and they're good learners. And those are the words of the children again. There's not an awful lot on children's perceptions of spectacles. The few papers I did find were very old, but again, I think it comes from perhaps some of the TV characters that children, historically, you know, the children who do well at school have usually got the glasses on, but this must be where the children are gaining some of their perceptions. The best dancer was the doll without the disability, but closely followed by the doll in the wheelchair and the doll with a hearing impairment. Now, this to me was really interesting. And so I did more research. In the UK, we have a lot of family entertainment shows, dancing, Dancing on Ice, Torval and Dean. And we also have Strictly Come Dancing. So we have, and families sit together, often with quite young children, to watch these family entertainment. And on a lot of those programs, they are seeing, you know, children are seeing people with disabilities often partaking in some of those dance shows. And I'm certain that that is partly where it's come from, but also Action for Children, say in the UK, we're building a lot of disability into some of the children's TV programs. Okay, so for me, for a child to say, and the bottom is a quote, direct quote, even in wheelchairs they can dance, they just can't be lifted or thrown. So to me, they've seen that, a child has seen that perhaps on one of the family entertainment programs. Behaviour. Okay, so they were asked who's most likely to get in trouble and who's least likely to get in trouble. So the doll in the wheelchair again was seen as best behaved because they're not going to be naughty because they'll have to move, but they can't, they're going to have to sit at the back of the class. That's the child's perception. They can't join in. You've got to sit at the side. They probably can't physically get round the tables and the chairs. They're going to have to sit at the back of the class. The doll with the Down syndrome was seen to be the worst behaved. And when she asked why, the comments kept coming back to the doll's facial features. Say it looked naughty. Again, it's just, it keeps pinpointing back to the medical model. Children's views are often linked to this medical model of disability. Facial features, the last theme. As I say, the free play, I think one of the mistakes we'll own up to this. Literally, she asked the questions first. So the questions obviously were contained around friendships, sports, how children behaved inside the classroom. And then at the end, she just said, you can play with the doll now as long as you like. And she continued taking notes. In hindsight, it may have been best to put the free play at the beginning. I actually didn't state this inside the journal. It's just since the journal I've thought it would have been better with young children just to let them get used to the dolls first, to see that immediate free play, and then ask the questions. So I think for me, note to self and any other student that I supervise, this free play is important first to capture the immediate unfiltered thoughts from children. Okay, but when they were playing, these are the sorts of things that the children were saying. There was quite a lot more content, but I just picked up a few of things that that were said. Its face looks different. It's got a weird look. It's naughty. He looks really weird. I hate him. He's dumb. I hate him because he wears glasses. He looks terrible because he's got a cut lip. They all look handsome, apart from that one. He's a bully. Her cut lip is gross. It looks disgusting. She's naughty. So again, children are just looking at faces, you know. Social media may cause children to hold these unrealistic beauty ideals. Just thinking of the Disney princesses, some work I've done with young children on Disney characters. So the quest for these flawless faces, these beautiful bodies, whose appearance is different. Those children and characters who have got different appearances are at risk of being excluded and bullied, leading to negative psychological well-being, and children perhaps not wanting to go into school, so it could have educational impact on educational outcomes, and children with Down syndrome particularly at risk. So before I conclude and sort of offer some suggestions, what can we do with young children? Are there any questions, Leslie, in the chat?
There are not, but I do have a question for you.
Okay, please.
Do you think that these reactions would be different? The dolls seem to be babies, young. If the dolls represented older ages, do you think you'd get different findings, or does that?
I think that's a really good question. I think 6 and 7-year-olds are still perhaps used to those dolls, aren't they, playing? I think if we'd have got much older, but I think it would be useful to do a similar follow-up study using dolls that looked older, definitely. And if you think about the doll with the Down syndrome, they kept saying that one's good at football because it looks stronger, but that had hair, so it didn't quite look like a baby doll. Okay, so again, and we've owned up to that, saying it looked older, that doll, than some of the baby dolls, but it was just financial implications for the student who was doing this. So yeah,
Interesting.
but children, again, the 6-year-olds, they're still quite young, so some of them will have got the baby dolls at home still. But yeah, I think probably older dolls with older children, perhaps towards the end of their primary school age. So they finish school probably around 10, 11 before they move into high school. That would be probably good to do something very similar using older dolls.
That's a great point. Melina did put a question in the chat. Do you have any plans to try to introduce an educational component and then capture the opinions post?
Millie has moved on. I would love to do something, to follow up this. Our students have free choice of dissertation topics, so it's really just, we can't really force them as lecturers. They just come with their interests, and we work with those interests. So for me, it would be finding somebody who, and I will share this study with my undergrads and my master's students. So, if there are, if anybody wanted to continue this, I definitely would work towards, and there needs to be some educational package, I think, put together. I think sorry, that was probably the question that was asked of me. I work within a team of special educational needs lecturers who work round schools, so that's perhaps something we could think about devising, and trying to introduce. It's just through the curriculum. The curriculum's quite prescriptive, and again, a lot of it is centered around race and gender, but this is the gap. So we probably need some lobbying and to make sure that this is included too. Okay, so I suppose this is the sort of educational package that I feel, we could be devising around this, and it's the approach. And the diversity dolls are useful just as a starting point, but they're not really you could question how realistic, and I think perhaps Leslie, that's where you were thinking, how realistic are they? And so the disability studies framework theory says that we really should be using materials that include or have been developed by people with disabilities themselves. There are videos that we could be using. I know, again, our BBC, we do BBC Bite Size, it's called, for school materials. And some children that have got autism, sight impairment, have put some videos together for teachers to use inside classrooms, because disability studies recommends that we should be using those realistic materials that have been produced by people with disabilities themselves. Children need regular, positive encounters with people with disabilities. And I think this is just the simple thing that all teachers can do, is just to incorporate and celebrate non-traditional body types into teacher materials. Everybody can do that, you know, just going to the book corner, having a look at the books and putting some of the, you know, the non-traditional body types into the children's book corners. And perhaps some of the dolls, you know, the early years toys inside the classrooms, just that are looking a little different, so that the children who may go into high school and have never actually met anybody with a disability, and then they go into bigger schools and may not know quite how to react. And encourage children to explore power dynamics, inequalities, stereotypes, concepts of fairness, accessibility, but also including children to how to include others, how they can actually let them problem solve. How can they move spaces around for their children, their classmates who have got additional needs. And I think it's as well trying to look at the strengths. Everybody has strengths, and the work that we do with young children, looking at similarities, not just differences, but looking at the similarities, things we have in common. Everybody struggles with something, and just having things like circle time, we can be sharing some of those things that we have in common, our differences, things that we struggle with. Children that have got perhaps special educational needs and disabilities, how they can help others. So it's just engaging in those narratives and encouraging practitioners to have some of those conversations. So I have put some, I'd say Bacon and Lalvani. That is, you know, that's a really good paper. Very much linked to the early years and how we can start doing some of this work with very young children. Derman Sparks again, looking at anti-bias education, but I'd say Bacon and Lalvani definitely on disability. And just in case, if there are students or wanting to travel overseas to think about studying for a master's programme, there are two programmes. The programme that I coordinate, which is looking at marginalised people and how we can make differences inside our schools and inside our communities. I have a lot of international students. I've actually got at the moment students from Arizona, from Kenya, from Iraq, obviously from the UK, Nepal, and some of the conversations that we have around disability. You know, in the past we've had Nigeria, India, just some of these conversations and open discussions about how, you know, the stigma across the different countries, not just linked to disability, but to gender, to poverty, etc. So the course is looking at children's welfare, human rights, education, psychology and sociology. It's a bit of a mix of those disciplines. So if anybody is interested, please do get in touch with me. I can give you more on a one-to-one basis. So over to for questions, if anybody has any.
Melina, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. Would you want, we've been talking in the chat about puppets, Paula, and Melina's group. Do you care to describe that, Melina? I put the link in.
Sure. Hi, Paula. This is really interesting work. So thank you for sharing with us today. In the chat, Leslie had put in a picture or a link to our Count Me In puppets. And these puppets were purchased prior to me coming onto this program. But our program is a health information center, and we provide peer support to parents who have children with complex medical needs. And so this this puppet group is part of a series called Count Me In, and they come with their own curriculums so that the puppeteers can take them out. And they were developed, I believe, to go into schools to provide that type of educational component. Here, I think we had difficulty launching it for many reasons. A lot of people had trouble being the actual puppeteer and having to worry about memorizing the script and things like that. And then also, as you mentioned, getting into the schools to actually provide that type of training. So I've been interested in working with the team to kind of reinvigorate the puppets into being used differently so that maybe they're just taken out into the community at different events that we have, and as a kind of a thing that would bring people over and see what's going on, and then having different books that are out on display. And so I was really interested in this presentation today, and thinking about like all of the questions that were going through my mind about, oh, I wonder if we could do that. I wonder if we could use the puppets. Have you seen these before?
Not this specific, but we have in our department a bit of a debate between diversity dolls and puppets, and some colleagues won't use the puppets because they prefer the diversity dolls. So the diversity dolls you can't put your hand in. So the diversity dolls with young children, they say, are going to be taken more seriously than a puppet who's more like a toy. That's not necessarily my thinking, because I do use puppets as well. But there's a lot of training, that we offer our teachers in the use of puppets, not to speak for the puppet, but the puppet speaks to you. So it's to literally, and don't try and disguise your voice, because the children will know that it's you and not the puppet. So there's quite a lot of teaching and education around the use of puppets and persona dolls. Do you have that sort of guidelines?
I don't. It's interesting that you shared that perspective. I haven't heard of it, but I made a note to look into it a little bit more, because I haven't necessarily seen the diversity dolls. So when I saw yours that you were just showing, I was like, oh, those are really fun too.
Okay, well, the baby dolls are probably, they're not necessarily ones I would use. The student made those, if you like. I don't know. I've got diversity dolls in my my cupboard right next to me here, but they're often linked to race and ethnicity. I've got a whole, probably about 10 of them collection that I normally take into. I'm actually working from home this evening, but when I'm in class, I will take them in, and I have a selection of diversity dolls with no hole for your hand, and then I've got the puppets that we can operate. But if you want to get in touch with me, because I probably have got some guidelines I on the use of puppets and persona dolls, I will send you what I've got if you find that useful.
Yes, thank you. I will.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. And I put that, I sent you an email and put that link in that email too, Paula, for that background.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions who want to share? I'm looking in the chat. I really appreciated the dolls as well. I mean, I thought, I totally understood what you were saying about the age of the dolls, and just as developmentalist, I thought it might change. It's interesting, very interesting work. I love it. I hope Millie continues to look at this wherever she is. Well, I tell you what, if we do not have any questions, I really appreciate you presenting your work, Paula, and I hope this is not the last. I'm sure it's not going to be the last. I did, for our attendees, I did put the evaluation link in there. Please give us your feedback so that we can continue to make this what you want it to be and interesting for you for this hour. And let me know if you need a certificate of attendance. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great afternoon here. And Paula, have a wonderful evening there. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, for inviting me, and thank you for attending, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.